Gospels.
What's your name?
Rachel.
Hey, Rachel.
They're not necessarily eyewitness accounts. They're written in the third person, and the reason why we have the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is thanks to the Catholics putting those labels on there. So I guess I don't understand why you say they are eyewitness accounts.
Why do I think they're eyewitness accounts?
Right.
Because they contain eyewitness data. Like, for example, the Gospel of John, there are 59 eyewitness details in that document called the Gospel of John that could only have been known by an eyewitness or somebody who knew an eyewitness.
Okay, is it possible that someone could have just been writing a story?
Well, then you'd have to discount all the other evidence that doesn't appear to be a story. It appears to be a historical account.
From the Bible, right? The Bible is writing about, like, Mark is the first gospel that was written, and
probably.
You see, this is why Christians cannot claim historicity when it comes to their Bible, because they often try to move you into a different direction, but oftentimes that direction that they move you into, if applied to the Bible, contradicts the Bible within itself, or causes the Bible to not be a historical document. When you apply the same measure by which that they are saying the Bible is historical to other works. And I'm going to give you an example in just a minute of how that doesn't work, and I'm going to give it to you in detail, so stay around for it to catch the details of it, of how his detailed statement invalidates his entire statement within itself. Now, the first part that the young lady was asking, to which he never answered, is the fact that the Gospels are anonymously written, and that these names were applied to the Bible somewhere in around the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century BCE, and that they weren't originally part of the narratives being these names. But the church in itself, the Orthodox Christian Church, which becomes the Catholic Church, are the ones who actually gave those names to the Bible. This is prior to the Council of Nicaea that those names had been already applied. Now, we know for a fact that the earliest writings that we have, which is really just a scrap, it's like a little scrap, it's not an entire book, dates somewhere in around about 55, 60 BCE CE at the earliest, and then could be all the way up to about 90 CE. So we're looking at, decades gone by before any of these writings ever appeared. Now, when we take that into consideration, we have to say that these books were not written by any eyewitness, because the eyewitnesses in and around early 1st century, at the latest, someone who was an adult and capable of writing or capable of witnessing these events in the 30s, if you then add the remaining years, these people would be in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and we know their life expectancy was not as long, especially living under Roman rule and with disease and that sort of thing that was rampant during those time frames. So it is unlikely that the people who actually wrote these Gospels were writing based on listening to an eyewitness, but even listening to that eyewitness does not validate that what they are telling you is an actual true story, that they could be inflaming the stories greatly. And then he goes into, well, if you discount that, then you have to discount the fact that all the evidence of the details that are in this story validates that it is not a story, but it is actually a historical account. Well, the same thing can be said for Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, especially when we're discussing the portions about the Trojan War. Now, you may say that, well, Homer wrote his stories in between the 8th and 7th century BCE, and the Trojan War supposedly happened somewhere around the 12th and 13th century BCE. So we have centuries, hundreds of years that have went by. So we know that he's not writing based on eyewitness accounts, but his accounts are being written based on Eratosthenes' writings, where he is saying that the Trojan War occurred in and around 1100 BCE, which would be the 12th century BCE. Now, we have archaeologically found the city of Troy based on the writings of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. The city of Troy has been found, and archaeological dating shows that the city of Troy was burned down and that it happened more than likely in the 1100s BCE. the same time that Aristosthenes claimed that it had actually occurred. So now that we know that Homer is writing based on someone who possibly could have been an eyewitness or spoken to eyewitnesses concerning this war, well, he then brought in details. Well, what are the details? Because something has a bunch of details that validates it, that makes it an historical account. Okay, we know the city of Troy happened. We know the Greek Mycenaean civilization attacked them. We know that Agamemnon was the leader of multiple city-states within Greece. We also know that based on these stories and archaeological evidence, that they came and they attacked the city of Troy, and the fighting was over a woman. Now, the details. In the details of the Iliad and the Odyssey, we have very definite details about how Paris, who was a prince of Troy, either seduced or took Helen by force, or seduced her, but took her from the Spartan king Menelaus, something like that. Menelaus took him from them. But those details also include that at some point, those two decided to have a battle between each other, and whoever wins would then become the husband of Helen. And Helen was from Sparta. Now, then it talks about how when Paris was almost defeated, that the Greek goddess Aphrodite came in and flew him away right before he was killed, took him to Helen's bedchamber, and then they made love. It also talks about how Achilles, whose mother was a sea goddess and nymph, that she, a minor deity, was in support of her demigod son. And when there was a argument between Agamemnon and Achilles, because Agamemnon decided to go ahead and give back the young lady he had taken from the temple of Apollo. I can't remember her name, it starts with a C. Had taken from the temple of Apollo, and Apollo was angry about that, so he had caused a plague to come over the Mycenaean army. And it wasn't until the Greek king Odysseus took her back to Apollo before the plague ended, and this was lasting for 10 years, took her back, that then Agamemnon took one of Achilles' slave, her name starts with a B, is Belicia, something like that. Achilles refused to fight for Agamemnon, and he had the best troops, so they were embattled against each other, but that wasn't settled until Achilles' mother goddess went and smoothed things over with Zeus. And so all these god things happen, all these details, intricate details about who got mad at who and who fought who, and Agamemnon telling the troops that if you don't want to fight anymore, just go ahead and leave. And some of them were about to leave because they had been fighting for 9 years. And, but Odysseus convinced them to stay, and how the gods were like, oh, we're gonna break up the truce between them. And Hera had somebody shoot Menelaus so that the fighting resumed, and all these different details that are within it. Claiming details doesn't make it a story, but make it historical accounts. All of these are details, but it doesn't make it an historical account. And as a matter of fact, we have more archaeological evidence that the city of Troy existed and that it burned down in and around the time frame that Eratosthenes says that it did than we have of the story of Jesus. So by that account, if the Jesus story is true based on supposedly a person writing based on someone else who saw it, we can say the same thing for the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Trojan War, which would mean that we can then say, since their details include Achilles being a demigod, that Zeus was involved, Apollo was involved, Hera was involved, Aphrodite was involved. Achilles' mother name is something like Thetis, that she was involved, that all these gods and demigods were involved, then that means that all these gods and demigods are real and are truthful. And since we have this archaeological evidence, that makes it all facts, and that these gods exist. So y'all better stop with the Jesus and start saying, Hail Zeus, which some people think that that's what Jesus means. Yeah, I better start doing that and start worshiping Zeus or Aphrodite and all these other people, because that would be the religion that was written way before your biblical religion was written. And that would be the true gods of the Greeks. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.